Hey guys, and welcome to our FinTech Friday features hosted by Dix Compliance Solutions. I'm Karen, I'm sitting here with Simon, and today we want to talk about suspicious activity reports.
Yeah, definitely. So we came to this idea for this week mostly because we were reading reports in the media about the significant increase in Germany to suspicious activity reports, which is not just a German problem, rather we're seeing it across Europe, and actually internationally. So there's been a significant increase, I think, in Germany within the last 2 years. You can see an increase of about 40% actually.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah.
How is that possible that there's such a huge increase?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that firms are becoming more aware and more, let's say, attuned to the requirements of the AML law and the AML legislation. So they are worried about breaching regulations. They're worried about what might happen if they don't report, and there has been a change in the way that you report, especially in Germany. So it's changing a complete platform. So through that process, I think they became a lot more aware of what was required of them.
So those reports, are they like real issues, or are most of them not really concerning at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we don't really have the in-depth analysis of what was reported, but you can see that quite a small percentage of them actually end in arrests or in the seizure of funds, which is the case generally speaking internationally as well. So you don't very often see a very high percentage ending in a seizure. But of course that has a lot to do with the way that the criminal justice system works as well. Like you cannot remove freedom and seize things without significant proof and without a significant process. So
yeah. But could you say that most of them are like waste of time, most of those reports?
Yeah.
Or is that?
I think a lot of it is perhaps. So you have two issues. I think one is the idea of what we would call like reporting to free yourself. The idea that you have to report basically anything which could be slightly suspicious, just so that you feel like you've fulfilled your obligation and won't get in trouble for it.
Okay.
But actually the authorities try to prevent that, so they are explicitly saying that they don't want to just have reports of anything. You know, they would rather have detailed reports that are well thought out and have real reasoning behind it.
Yeah.
It's quite hard.
Yeah, it's probably harder for them to investigate as well if they have like really badly written reports.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what a lot of the assumption from the private sector is, and from the banks and institutions often, is that these people are the public authorities, so they must have some kind of all-knowing network where they see everything. But actually, most of the people that are sitting there and analysing these things, they only have the information that they're sent.
Yeah.
So it's quite hard.
So it's more like more quality over quantity.
Yeah, sure. On the one side, sure. However, I must say, if I was working inside an institution again, you know, or when advising institutions, if there's a doubt as to whether to report, I always tell them report, because at least then you've gone through this duty. And so it's really about finding that balance, and how can you get the information that leads you to a specific suspicion transferred, and the knowledge transfer, so to say, to the authorities as efficient as possible.
Is there any way for someone who is reporting to like get a better overview if it's really a suspicious transaction or like anything that could help you to really know that's suspicious or not?
I think a lot of issues they come out of the fact that today in a lot of institutions, different types of AML tasks are separated, so they're very abstract. There's a lot of silos within the business. You know, you'll have teams looking at wealth management, you'll have teams looking at international transactions, teams looking at PEP and sanctions. So you're dealing with so many different systems that piecing together all that information is in of itself a couple of hours required just to understand the case. So I think a lot of it is really about how do you display information to your users and to your teams. Do you want that to be efficient, or do you want to just make them work as a detective, you know?
Yeah.
It's hard.
would it help for banks to work together on that? Like in the Nordic banks, they just started to work joint venture for a
Yeah.
KYC
Yeah, it did.
company. And is that something that could help? Because I think it's Danske, Swedbank, Nordea, and three other they started up.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you make. So the Nordic venture is actually, yeah, it's focusing on KYC. You know, there's a whole multitude of reasons behind that, including what we would call the privileged approach for banks. So the privileged approach that you are allowed to give any kind of KYC that is done by a regulated institution, alongside sort of trust issues and various other things. There's quite a lot of reasons for that being done, but it's not really done in the transaction monitoring space. It's not really done in the suspicious activity reporting space. It's also quite different from country to country, you know. So you would quite often experience in Germany, for example, the MLRO of one bank phoning another bank to ask on in-depth information, but that's a manual process.
Yeah.
And it requires that that's been escalated to that level, transferred over, de-escalated, information's been collected and kind of passed through a system. It's a really lengthy process. One thing that has been suggested by a number of institutions across Europe, and which they really are pushing for, is actually what we're working on, the internet, the exchange of data as an interface of anonymous data between banks and other financial institutions and the public authorities, which allows for essentially a flow of information and makes people aware very quickly of new methodologies, makes people aware very, very quickly if they have perhaps some form of customer in common or person or entity in common that is acting in a certain way without transferring and submitting sensitive personal data through that portal. There's quite a lot of processes that the data has to go through in order to be submitted in that way, but I think it's really vital for a lot of the institutions, because the whole point of what you're doing is serving one common good, and if you isolate each of those pieces of information, if you only have one piece of the puzzle, then you're putting that process back by 6 months. You know, it's pretty hard.
That's true. Yeah. What effect does it have? Yeah.
The suspicious activity reporting.
Yeah.
Two things. So obviously, well, the whole point in the suspicious activity reporting is obviously to give the authorities the chance to follow up on it. But seeing such a huge increase as we have done recently, means that most of the authorities actually are sitting on a huge backlog.
Yeah.
Problem is we don't necessarily know what's in that backlog, so it could be something really dangerous or really, potentially catastrophic. I know last year in one of the German newspapers, Handelsblatt, we had a case where a terrorist attack was kind of, let's say, in the last moments of actually happening. It was about to take place. And luckily the authorities got that in time, but the report itself had been sitting in a backlog which could have been prevented a lot earlier.
Yeah.
So it has a very strong human effect on society. And we really need to make sure that those things are being dealt with as efficiently as possible.
How could they make it more efficient?
Yeah, well, I'm sure if you speak to most of the people working within those departments, the first thing they'll say is that they need more efficient reports, more effective reporting happening to them, and that they need more team members. But I really believe that one of the massive things that would work is a more effective reporting method through a shared interface. So again, as I say, we're working on some data sort of interfaces with some public authorities, but one of the major things we are working on for a variety of European authorities right now is the kind of friendly user interface that we create for banking customers, and offering them that process so that when it comes to the authority, when they receive their SCR, they are automatically seeing the links to other institutions, automatically seeing the links to other SARs that are in the system or other issues that have previously been reported.
Alright, so thank you guys for watching and vielen Dank fürs Zuhören, and we'll see you next week on Friday.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Have a good weekend, schönes Wochenende und viele Grüße.